Hi, my name is Yahav, and I was born and raised as an Israeli and as a Zionist. During the past few years, I've gone through a process of questioning the narrative I grew up with regarding this land we live in and the people living on it. This podcast is about voices of the disillusioned. Each episode is a one-on-one heartfelt conversation with an activist who supports the Palestinian struggle, telling the story of the journey that led them to see through what they were taught. Each of these people has their own unique path that I believe anyone can learn from, whether you're a Palestinian or a Jew living here or abroad, or just anyone who feels strongly about this subject. I hope you learn as much as I learn from them about how to build a better future for all people between the river and the sea. Ayelet is an opera singer, prayer leader, and full-spectrum doula, which is a care worker who offers support to people during the full spectrum of pregnancy and the different gates of life in a holistic manner, from menstruation through preconception, to birth to abortion, to miscarriage to adoption, and so on. She believes in bringing music, spirituality, and collective prayer back into activism for the purpose of collective liberation of all people. If you want to hear a bonus episode with Ayelet, there's one on my Patreon, which is exclusive for the Patreon supporters. And in addition, we recorded a live music session with Ayelet and Elik, two amazing musicians, and it's on YouTube and here on Spotify for you to watch and listen to. All of these are in the show notes. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Ayelet.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Really happy to have you here. We had a really interesting conversation recently, and I think there's a lot of interesting things that you bring to the conversation. But as always, let's start from your background, your family, or the way people phrase it in a simple way. Where do you come from?
So, I was born in Jerusalem to wonderful parents. If my parents will ever hear this episode, I love you very much. You're good parents. And my parents got to Jerusalem and met and had children after my father moved to Israel from England, which was where he was born and raised. And my mother was born in Jerusalem. She's a first generation. Her father came before the First World War from Hungary, and her mother came from Poland after the war as an orphaned child whose parents died from sickness. And both my mother's parents came from long lineages of like rabbis and cantors, prayer leaders. And if it wasn't for the war and the Holocaust, I don't know if they would have moved to Israel, but they did come to Israel with a Zionist, with like a great love for the country and great love for Judaism. And my grandmother's story, which is all the Holocaust stories are insane, but like her story is really that she came from like a long lineage of rabbis dating, to medieval times. And her older sister saved their heritage for her and her other siblings. Like she taught them everything her father did and taught her during the war, after the war.
Like she preserved everything.
Everything
that was taken away.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. My father's family, his father came from Belarusia, and he has a really amazing and terrible survival story of the Second World War, of the Holocaust. There's been movies made about it, like Hollywood movies about some of his experiences, like with the Bielski brother partisan group who survived in the forests of Belarusia. So my grandfather was part of that group. And before he joined them, they were in a in a ghetto, in a work camp in their town in Belarus, and 250 Jews escaped via tunnel. Like they dug a tunnel for 6 months.
From the camp?
From the camp, outside of the camp, and escaped. And a big number died during the escape, were shot. And my grandfather, who was injured, survived. It's really insane. And after the war, I think he tried to live in Israel, where he had some cousins who had also survived who moved to Israel. But he had an understanding that if he stays in Israel, he's not going to have an easy life and he's not going to be financially successful, which is very true. I think a lot of Holocaust survivors nowadays in Israel suffer from terrible, terrible poverty.
Yeah.
And he moved to England, and from having absolutely nothing became a very wealthy man. He started factories and made shoes. So my father grew up in Jewish, wealthy England, but he suffered from anti-Semitism in school and felt at some point in his life that he is missing a more intellectual and more spiritual surrounding, and that in his 20s he moved to Israel and he married, had a child, divorced, and then he met my mother. And my mother grew up in an Orthodox religious home, and she was always very rebellious and had some would call it a big mouth, but I think she was just always a very opinionated woman. And she had a deep longing to be able to deal and to learn scripture and Torah and spirituality and to be influenced and to influence. But it just wasn't possible for women at the time. She studied to be a lawyer, finished her degree, did it for half a year, and then dropped it. She said, "This isn't for me." She was one of the first Israelis who traveled in the East. She went to India and Nepal and experienced, I guess, beautiful spirituality. And coming back to Israel, really wanted to find a way to connect her love of Judaism to this spirituality that was I guess really soul opening and eye opening for her. And she and my father were looking at some point for the same thing, and they were part of this movement of New Age Judaism, of people wanting to still keep the laws of Judaism, still learn the scriptures, still be in this very intellectual part of Judaism, but have that be part of a deeper spiritual experience.
And be influenced by the Eastern traditions.
Also by the Eastern traditions, also by the 60s hippie movement.
Mm-hmm.
And rabbis like Shlomo Carlebach. And eventually they found their rabbi, whose name is Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi.
We'll put a link to all of these references to whoever wants to learn more about.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. And I know that Reb Zalman went as one of the Chabad missionaries to bring back the Jews, and eventually found psychedelics and ecstatic spirituality. And he started a new Jewish movement called Jewish Renewal. And my parents discovered him and became his students. And eventually my mom became a rabbi.
Did she study to be a rabbi with Reb Zalman?
Yeah.
Mm.
They have a rabbinical school. So this is the home I grew up in. I was born in one place in Jerusalem, and my mother, again, I was born at home. My mom birthed me at home, which was also something that she got from America when they lived there before, and was not done at the time in Israel, almost at all. And when I was 5, I think, they moved into a new home, and it was the most exciting thing ever. We got some help from my grandfather, from Saba Jack, and moved into this beautiful home in this neighborhood in Jerusalem called Baka, which was at the time going through gentrification, filled with empty Arab homes, Palestinian homes. And they moved into one of the homes, and that's the home that they live in to this day. And it's this beautiful high-ceilinged house with a big garden and yard with 2 palm trees in the entrance. And it's this gorgeous house with like a lot of things that my mom brought from India. And from a very young age, the house was filled with music because when I was a baby, my mother was not yet a rabbi. She did music circles for mothers and babies. So I was immersed in music as a very young child, and I was taken to concerts, and I started playing the violin at age 5. And we lived in this growing and still growing bubble of like Anglo-Saxon Jewry in Jerusalem. And there was always prayer in the house, and we would always go to different synagogues who also tried to like have the prayer and the experience of the prayer be a big part of what we were doing.
And I want to ask a question about this home.
Mm-hmm.
You learned later on in your life, like as an adult, that it used to belong to a Palestinian family that had become refugees since this home was taken from them. But during your younger years, do you remember asking your parents like who lived here? Like, why is this house, like something about it probably looked different than the houses of the friends that you had at school? So did you ask them like, what's the story?
I don't think I ever asked them what the story. I do remember that it was called an Arab home, and it was more to say of the architecture. It's like, oh, why is our house so cool in the summer? You know, we don't actually need air conditioning so much. Oh, because it's an Arab home. It's built out of these big blocks of stone, so it keeps it cool in the summer. And there's these wrought iron bars in front of the windows that have like nice spirals to them, and that's also like a very Arabic style. I don't think I thought of the fact that there used to be people there. Of course, once we learned like history lessons, which we'll get to later, and we were told about the 1948 war, which, you know, the Jewish fighters came, and then a lot of the Arab population had to like fled.
But that wasn't connected to the home that you're living in.
In some place it was, because they mentioned my neighborhood. They're like,
they did.
And this neighborhood, and they fled, they ran away. But the narrative was of victory. Like, they ran away, and that's because, you know, they would have killed us. And
so there wasn't like, it didn't really register until later on.
No, much later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you grew up in a religious home. You could call it, in the Israeli context, part of religious Zionism.
Yes, for sure.
And did they send you to a religious school as well?
No, they decided to send me and my siblings to a new school that had started. It was this new project of bringing religious Jews and non-religious Jews, Israelis, into one school, which was unheard of at the time. There was like, you know, the regular non-religious school system, and then there was like the really religious schools. And my parents wanted something alternative for us. They were progressive in the way that they did want us to like learn to live with people who were different from us. And an important note to add is that this school started after Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was murdered. And a lot of people from the liberal left thought that the problem was that non-religious and religious people, Israelis, don't get along. Mm-hmm. And that's the riff, and that's what caused his assassination. And this is something that we need to fix. And that's why this school was started. The school was supposed to be for liberal leftist people from the religious and the non-religious communities to come together. And their plan kind of backfired when a school in the neighborhood, which was a relatively like low-income neighborhood in Jerusalem, closed down. And then all of the students from the low-income neighborhood who were in the school that closed down were like
merged into
this school. And so I was in this school, And as a young girl in like first and second grade, I remember having a fantastic time. I remember having friends. I remember like it was just mostly fun. I do have memories of like very wild, very violent children who would at some times like chase me down and try to beat me up or something like that. And only later, and we'll get to that in a minute, when we all grew up a little, did the difference become very clear that these people are from a different class, basically.
And this was a school for Jews only.
Yes.
Of course. You didn't know any Palestinians at the time, whether they live in Jerusalem or anywhere else.
If I knew the word Arab, it was probably linked to something scary. But at such a young age, I think I was very, very sheltered. And if there was like a war going on or some kind of conflict, there was probably like an intifada or something. But like I was just so, I was wrapped in my bubble of like, of community, of family.
And then you moved to the US, you said.
Yeah. At the age of 8, my parents and me and my 3 siblings to Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, which was where Reb Zalman lived and where my parents wanted to study with him and to live in a different country for a bit before we got too old as children.
They wanted to give you the experience of, you know, seeing something different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, I don't know. I think those were some of the best years of my life living in Boulder, Colorado, which is also, in retrospect, an oasis. It's a bubble of white, wealthy, hippie people who were so nice. And just the jarring difference of like walking on the street and this random person comes up and tells my brother, "Hey, you got a neat shirt there." And just like smiles at him and keeps walking. And I'm like, oh my God, he's so nice. And they're like, yeah, it's Boulder. Everybody's nice. And it's, yeah, everybody was nice. And everything was beautiful. And the nature there is stunning. And we were part of the Jewish renewal community there. We had also like this beautiful house near a lake it was just like, it was heaven. And I had like my best friend who her 2 parents are also rabbis. And there were challenges, of course, of, you know, having a strange name that nobody could pronounce, of like learning the language really, really quickly. But I loved going to school. I loved learning how to read and how to write in cursive and how to like write poetry. And just like, it was like a really good school system. And coming back to Israel was very traumatizing. And I went back to the same school, to the same class with the same children. Everyone was different. Everyone was mean. Everybody laughed at my accent because I came back with an American accent when I spoke Hebrew. Oof, I would like come home every day crying. And for some reason, I never left the school, which I think it's something that will repeat in my story many times, which was me trying to like prove that I can belong. Like, I'm not going to give up because it's hard for me. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to prove to people that I can belong.
Like, I'm not a quitter.
I'm not a quitter and I'm not a crybaby, you know? But I think from that experience onwards, I never felt like I belonged in Israeli society.
And so you wanted to belong because you felt like you didn't belong.
I wanted to, and just at times was like, I do not belong to this. And I would make friends and later lovers with English-speaking people or people with Anglo-Saxon backgrounds. I didn't listen to the music, didn't understand the culture, just felt that everything was super violent. Everything was about laughing at the other person, of making fun of other people, of belittling other people.
And so you decided to move to a different school when you were in 8th grade.
I finally had enough. Because I stayed there for like so many years. I don't know why, because I really, really suffered. And I decided to move to a religious girls' school, which was meant to also be like progressive and feminist, in the sense that they would also teach us like Jewish scripture. And I just wanted to be away from the distraction and the bullying of boys and to focus on school.
Were they really feminist?
Nowadays, I really don't think they were. I have a very clear understanding of what feminism is now. And I don't think that just saying that women, can do the same thing as men is feminism.
Especially not if you stand in the entrance to the school, making sure all the girls have a skirt that's long enough.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was told off for wearing short skirts because I was like rebellious at the time. I just don't know what was really feminist about it. I mean, it's better than other schools where women can't do anything. But just knowing like how very Zionist the whole thing was, to put feminism over it is white feminism to me. It doesn't mean anything to try and raise women to the standards of men or to liberate just white women when Palestinian women or black women or poor women, stay at the bottom. That is meaningless to me.
And this also persisted through high school into the delegation to Poland that many Israeli schools send students to. How did you experience that?
Yeah. So the delegation to Poland came really hand in hand with our history lessons, which, oh my God, I'm so angry at what was supposedly called history lessons, where we learned Jewish history and Zionist history, basically, in the form of propaganda, because a lot was not said and only a certain narrative was told. We did not learn about the First World War at all. And the Second World War was basically Holocaust and the many, many terrible things that happened in the Holocaust. I wanted to go to Poland. I think everyone in my class went to Poland. My mother said, I don't think you should go to Poland because you're very, very sensitive. And this was another moment where I was like, I'm going to prove that I'm not. And I'm going to be like everyone else and I'm going to go. And it was a road trip from concentration camp to concentration camp. A big part of this trip was also visiting Jewish graveyards and the graveyards of like famous rabbis. And I think at every place we went and visited, we did a ceremony where we would sing songs and read poetry. At the end of every ceremony, we would sing the Israeli national anthem, Hatikva.
Of course.
And right after that, we would sing, I believe that the Messiah will come.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was like, that was the standard procedure until it ad nauseum, like it got boring.
Wow.
And, we all told our personal stories. And I remember praying so much at the time. And I wasn't a big prayer in the sense that, I don't know, I didn't love praying from like the prayer book because I couldn't connect to it. And suddenly, and on this trip, I was like praying 3 times a day. It was like, and we were walking around with Israeli flags. And there was, I think it was in either Majdanek or Auschwitz that we like went into a gas chamber. And the guide, we all had these like headphones and we could all hear what she was putting on. And she put on this like Jewish boy singing some Jewish tune, and it was just like heartbreaking. Utterly heartbreaking.
This is something that at this point most Israelis, when they're in 11th grade, go through. Just wanting to mention this for the listeners.
Yeah, and it will be different according to which school you go to.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went to visit Kiev in Poland, there's like a big place that used to be a synagogue that's now a museum, and we went to visit that. And then when we exited the museum, there was this big square and there was another school on the same trip, and this was like a non-religious school. And there was this like wonderful moment for us at this religious girls' school and this non-religious school. We all stood together in a circle and sang Am Yisrael Chai, like Israel is alive. And I don't know, whatever they knew, like we all sang it together. We probably sang the Tikva. And it was like, again, this empowerment of like, no, we're one people.
Unifying experience. Yeah.
This experience really strengthened, the way my grandmother lives her Jewish life, of like our Jewish tradition must not be forgotten. It has to be passed down. Like my sister passed it down. And it's so important because they're trying to wipe us out, you know? It's so important to keep it going. And that really connected in my soul at the moment of like, you know, the Jews, we have to continue.
I think this also connects to all the stories of your grandmother and your grandmother's sister and many other people who preserved the Jewish tradition even in times where they had nothing and they were under, you know, the worst conditions.
Yeah.
And those are very like inspirational stories, not only of survival of their bodies, but also of survival of the Jewish faith and tradition. And this is something that gives people a lot of strength while they're in Poland.
Yeah.
Like learning about these people and what they went through in the places where they actually went through.
And it connects the feeling that, thank God we have Israel to give us that, to give us...
That's the direct conclusion.
It always is. It's like this terrible atrocity happened and Israel is the conclusion. It's what saved my grandparents. It's what saved the Jewish tradition. Without it, Jewry would be gone.
Yeah. This is also a project, the delegation to Poland of 11th grade or between 11th grade and 12th grade teenagers in Israel. It used to be something that only the privileged ones could go to if they could afford it.
Because it was expensive, yeah.
And with time, it became both subsidized and cheaper. The flights became cheaper. And the whole, you know, there's a whole industry around these delegations. In Poland itself, like local businesses that work with like the agencies, but also the guides that come from Israel. And so there's this whole model of how this is built, and it's designed to reach that conclusion of Israel is the answer to all of these atrocities. The state of Israel is holy because it is what enables us to preserve this tradition, and nothing else will do that.
Yeah.
And it's very clear.
And, you know, and at the time, had my mother sat me down and told me, look, this is manipulative and I don't want you to go to Poland because I don't want you to go to the army. Like if she had given me like a political reason why I shouldn't go because she had thought that way, I might have listened to her and I might have been like, oh, hey, whoa, you have a point. But it wasn't. It was like, oh, Ayelet, you're too sensitive. And what happened in the Holocaust is too terrible for you to understand or to fully accept in your body, which is also kind of true. Like, yeah. I think the fact that we have all been soaked in the terrible things that happened in the Holocaust.
From a very young age.
From a very young age. And that we have so much footage of it and we have so many movies. It's so similar to like people witnessing the genocide happening right now. And yeah, I don't think anybody should see the things that we've all witnessed that happened in this war, in the Second World War and in the Holocaust. But I just wish my parents had told me something else instead of, you're too sensitive, you shouldn't go.
Mm-hmm. So I want to just jump back a little bit and talk about the encounters that you did have with Palestinians from a certain age. Your parents sent you to like a joint dialogue program.
Yeah. Again, very thankful for my parents. I think they had the right idea at heart. They sent me to a dialogue group called Kids for Peace, which exists to this day. At the time, I don't know what it's like now, but at the time, it was more of like a religious thing of bringing
like
interfaith, of bringing the three religions of Jerusalem, the main religions, to show that we're all human, you know, and to show that our religions aren't so different, or what are the differences? Let's learn about each other. You know, it's all one God at the end. And yeah, it was me. It was like two girls and two boys from every religion. And of course, the Christians and the Muslims were all Palestinians. And it was like, I think a year long of like weekly meetings and talking, and the language that was spoken was English. Not all of the participants could speak English. There was one boy, Johnny, I remember, who couldn't speak English, but he was there and there was a translator. And the peak of the whole group was to go to an American summer camp and to hang out with Americans and to just have a wild time. And that was like a lot of fun. And I mostly connected to the Americans because I was so much more drawn to them. And I remember we came back from the summer camp and we're expected to continue the dialogue sessions, but like the momentum sort of died. And suddenly it was like, why isn't everyone speaking English? Like, why can't I actually talk to Johnny? And I was annoyed at them for not knowing English. And I just felt like I couldn't really connect with a translator. And when the program finished, I finished with it. I felt that it had failed. I felt that I didn't become very close friends with the Palestinian children. And I was like, and that's okay, maybe. And that was as a child. But I think it was a good opening to seeing the humanity in Palestinians at the time. Also, I remember there was a Christmas Hanukkah party that we did. And it was at the time that Yasser Arafat passed away. And all of the Palestinian children were eulogizing him as like a hero, as like someone who was a peace leader who died. And I remember my parents' faces while they were speaking. I remember seeing that they were very uncomfortable. I was so clueless. I was still young. I was 11, 12 maybe. And later they were like, it was so strange for them to hear them talking about Arafat that way, because in their minds, he was like a terrorist leader. And that was just interesting for me to behold, but again, not something I could really understand or wrap my head around.
But it didn't make you trust them less. Like,
yeah.
You felt like it was kind of like pushing you away from them to see this difference between how they spoke about their leader and how your parents reacted to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I felt like, then they must be like brainwashed or something. Like there must be something very violent about them if this violent person was their hero.
It seemed like you also were busy fitting in Israeli society, like
For
making
sure.
a big effort to kind of like be like your classmates and not deviate from that, because that would be like social suicide.
Basically, yeah.
We'll go back to Kids for Peace later, but I want to ask about serving in the military.
Mm-hmm.
You went to an all-girls school, so religious girls in Israel, like religious girls that go to a religious school that's defined as religious, are basically automatically exempt. But you wanted to serve because you wanted to prove yourself.
Yeah, also because we were like a modern religious Zionist school.
Quote unquote feminist.
The option of going to the military was like a big one. And I remember we would go hiking, on a school field trip, and we would pretend to be like crazy combat soldiers. We'd be like running up the hills. We're like, yeah, we're going to be combat soldiers, like crazy stuff like that. And I drafted into what's called the Education Corps, which in retrospect, I would call the Hasbara Corps.
Which is propaganda.
Yeah. We were in charge of, first of all, in the course that we did, we were even more heavily brainwashed than we were before.
Like the Army military course, teaching you what you're going to be teaching the soldiers.
Exactly. We had to be full of knowledge and then pass it on to soldiers in all different places in the IDF.
Basically, this position is like, you could say cynically, it's the propaganda officer.
Yeah.
And are placed in different bases. In every single base.
Yes.
There's one of these, and they're in charge of making sure that all this content is transmitted to the soldiers in that base.
And more than that, because we were also in charge of making sure that the soldiers get sort of extracurriculum stuff, sort of fun days or museum days, or
which are all museums in memorial of soldiers who have fallen.
Exactly.
And different battles
and different histories of Zionism.
It's a fun day because they get to not be on the base and do something else.
But we also did fun stuff. Like I would take them on tours of Jerusalem and of Jaffa and South Tel Aviv. Like we did like fun stuff. They all just wanted to go home. Like they didn't actually want to be there. But that was my job, and I had to make sure they had a good time. And like if it was like a special day or a holiday or something, then to throw a party for Purim, or to, if it's the Holocaust Memorial Day, then to do like a ceremony. And now that I'm talking, I'm thinking like my job was to make the soldiers still want to be soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Like to make sure that they don't get up and say, fuck this, I'm going.
Yeah.
I feel, because you're also like reminding them, quote unquote, why they're here.
Exactly.
Because of all of the Holocaust and all of anti-Semitism, everything. Like, this is why they're here. And also, hey, look, we're also going to do some fun things together so you don't get bored out of your mind.
And also to teach them about the former wars and battles in which so many soldiers have fallen before them. And so who are they to pass on that option of like, to keep on this ritual of like sacrificing yourself for the country? Like, people did it before you, now it's your turn.
Yeah. And I learned all of these things before doing it myself. And so I was a super patriot at the end of the course of 3 months of like knowing by heart the names of all of like the head commanders of the IDF and all of the prime ministers. And it was just learning about the 1948 war and how Israel had one tank and one airplane and somehow they won and we don't know how they did it, but it was a miracle. And then also connecting it, I remember there were like courses connecting it to Judaism. And there were many non-religious girls who were really angry at this. They were like, stop forcing us to learn religious stuff.
But don't stop forcing down our throat the propaganda, the Zionist propaganda. Just stop with the religious stuff.
Just stop with the religious stuff. And I was like really hurt by that. I was like, but the religious stuff is so lovely. Like, why don't, like, that's not fair to me, who is like almost the only religious girl here.
And you can't disconnect it either.
Yeah. I was like, how can you disconnect it? It's all part, it's the Jewish state, for God's sake, you know?
Yeah.
And I was really like, I'm a religious girl here. And I did like ceremonies for holidays when we had to stay on base. Oh, my family was so proud of me. And I just want to mention that my mother did not do military service. She did civil service. And she told me, I don't think you should go to the military. And again, it wasn't because of politics. It wasn't because she didn't want me to be part of a conquering army. It's because she thought I was too sensitive. Mm-hmm. And that was another reason why I was like, I'm going to go. I'm going to be in the army. I'm going to belong finally. And I ended up being an educational officer in the Iron Dome unit, which was weird. I didn't know it was like a real unit. I thought it was just like a machine that shoots down rockets. And I experienced the Iron Dome firsthand, because as a person who lives in Jerusalem, you don't really experience rockets at all. Until recently. But at the time, not really. I experienced the Iron Dome and seeing them shoot rockets out of the sky for the first time in 2012, when I had just started my army service and I was in the education course. And so there were rockets fired from Gaza. I remember like running, it felt like I was running for my life. And then I remember seeing like the rocket blow up in the sky above me. And I'm looking up and I'm like, wow, thank God for Iron Dome. Thank God for Iron Dome. And then I was put into Iron Dome. And it was intense to be there. It was not easy because the Iron Dome is split into many, many different little sections. Little locations. Yeah, where protection is needed. So if there's a threat from, Lebanon, so there's lots of Iron Dome in the north and next to Haifa. And if there's a threat, there's always a threat from Gaza. So there's all around the cities in the south. And I had to go between all of the little sections and make sure that they all get their propaganda. And I was doing it alone for a long time. And then I had another girl join me. And I was really good at my job. And they really, really liked me there. I would sing in the ceremonies. And I threw like amazing Purim parties. People really loved me. And after a while, I started getting kind of tired. And my mind was completely set to go be an opera singer. And so during my army service, the second half of my army service, I would basically sneak out of the army base to go get voice lessons to prepare me for my audition for the Academy of Music in Jerusalem. And during my service, there was the 2014 assault on Gaza, which I didn't see at the time as an assault on Gaza, but as an assault on us, because again, that was again an experience for me of lots of rockets, lots of sirens, and being with the people whose job it is to actually defend. Like, that's all they do. They defend. And that was like a very exciting time for the soldiers in my unit. They loved it that finally there's action. They can see the rockets coming out of the machinery and blowing the rocket up in the sky. And they're like tense and it's like action, and they're getting food and goodies from like all the people from all around the towns and villages of southern Israel. And I was driving between them and giving them candy and like a crossword puzzle to do in their free time. I did not think of what was happening to God. Like, to me, that was like this blob of enemy that we need to protect our people from.
And towards the end of your service, you basically put yourself in a birthright bus.
And you say put yourself because I was in charge of putting other soldiers into birthright. And then I was like, I'm going to put myself into birthright. Yeah. And my mom helped me find a special birthright of Jewish renewal rabbis who come from this Jewish renewal rabbi school, who are bringing American people who are specifically spiritual, artistic, interested in like exploring a different kind of Judaism to come to Israel.
So let me get this straight. You were in charge of choosing which soldiers would have the privilege of joining a birthright bus for like 10 days or a week. And so you had all these connections and you were like, I'm going to put myself in this bus.
Yeah. And this was after I had been on a different birthright trip. I'd been to 2 birthright trips, and the first birthright trip was terrible. I had a terrible time. I was with really young American kids who I really wanted to show them Israel. I really wanted them to take everything very seriously. And they didn't. They wanted to get drunk and have sex. And I didn't. I had a boyfriend. I wasn't interested. It was like, they weren't taking anything seriously. They weren't listening to the tour guide. And I had a terrible time. And I was like, I deserve another trip. And then my mother found me this trip and I put myself into it. I also put a good friend of mine into it. And we went together. And that was like, for me, 10 days of a life-changing experience. Because again, I was in this group with cool American Jews, and they were all artistic, and they all loved music, and they loved spirituality. And I was like really craving that after being in the army with people from all types of religious backgrounds or non-religious backgrounds. And I felt very lonely in my spirituality. And suddenly I was with these like really lively, really amazing people. And I was such a good propaganda tour guide. I was so good. And it was like a very special trip. We went to Tzfat, which is like this city of mysticism in northern Israel,
where Kabbalah
developed, and there's still like this very interesting, spiritual artistic community that lives there. And what we experienced there was like so powerful for one of the participants that he like actually wanted to like stay after the trip was over. And like he like went, I don't know what happened to him after that, but he like went to Tzfat and like studied with one of the people there. We prayed every day. We went to like the border with Syria, and there was like the revolts at the time, and we could like really hear the gunfire. It was like insane. And we were all crying, so sensitive about everything. And it was still like a time of heated war in Israel. Like, it wasn't over, the assault on Gaza.
Oh, it was during the 2014 war.
It was still happening. And I remember we were in Tel Aviv, and suddenly there was a siren. And close to the end, we went to like the desert and slept in a Bedouin tent, and we heard lots of aircrafts flying above us, and the guide was like, oh, they're just doing it's just practice, and we were all, and he told us the soldiers in secret, he's like, don't freak them out, but they're
actually going to Gaza.
They're going to Gaza.
Wow.
And there was one night where our tour guide, who was this sweet guy who played the guitar and was like sort of hippie dip, I don't know, he was kind of strange. He gave us this like talk, and he showed us a map of Israel, and he explained to us what the West Bank is and why it needs to be that way.
What is that way?
Why
it needs to be surrounded by a wall?
Yeah. Why we cannot merge the West Bank with the rest of Israel, because then so many Palestinian refugees will come from Jordan, will just be able to have free access into Israel, and they will bring many, many terrorists with them, and they will bomb the airport.
I have to say, you're the first person who has introduced me to this crazy idea, and it's just so strange to me that this tour guide was using this in like birthright trips. I'm like wondering how many American Jews heard this weird explanation of why the separation wall is.
There's parts of me that still believe, like, I'm still scared of that. I'm not sure how to get that out of my head, and maybe talking to you or to other people will give me more clarity. Like, I'm still very much afraid of
this like apocalyptic kind of scene where like thousands of people
just come and they stop the Jews from being able to leave, and they massacre us all.
This is the scenario that he was describing?
I think so. Yeah.
What's really weird about this is that Israel existed for decades before this wall was built.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. So that raises many questions about this theory, but we'll put that aside. That's weird theory. And so this is what they were told.
That's what they were told. That's what we were told. I remember they showed us like pictures that children in America drew of Israeli soldiers, and they look like monsters. And he's like, we have to change the way people see Israeli soldiers. They're not monsters. Look, they're nice, wonderful people.
Like this lovely young lady, Ayelet, that joined your bus.
Yeah,
This is why they have soldiers join the buses.
Yes.
So that you can see how the soldiers are so nice.
They're so nice, and that you might want to make aliyah and marry one of them and make nice Jewish babies.
Yeah. I was also on a birthright bus, by the way, when I was in my military service. But it was also one of those groups like you described that just wanted to get drunk and have sex.
Yeah. Yeah. It was real. They did a good job. And like a lot of the time we really focused on like creating like a very emotional experience. Like when we went to the Holocaust Museum, and they took us to, there's a place called Yad Layeled, which is like the memory of the child, which is this room, which I dare someone to make something like this now for all the children who died in Gaza. But like, it's this room filled with mirrors. It's a dark room filled with mirrors and pictures of children who were murdered in the Holocaust. And then there's one candle burning, and it looks like there's a million candles burning.
I remember that.
And you walk through the room and you hear like the names and the ages of the children. And you can't not be utterly shattered after something like this. And these sweet, sweet people came out like utterly, utterly destroyed. And I loved it. I loved every second of like making them feel the pain of the Holocaust and why Israel is so necessary.
The connection also between like this spiritual experience of Israel was also there to symbolize how the spiritual life of the Jews is not real unless it's happening in Israel.
Yeah, it's not real unless it's happening in Israel. It's not in sync with what's written in the scriptures, because it's all about how to live life with the seasons that are appropriate to Israel, with like the agriculture and the harvest. And it's not rich. It's not like in Jerusalem specifically. It's so spiritual. And nowadays, like, I don't feel that way anymore. But the idea that you come to Jerusalem, you go to the old city, you go to the, you know, the Western Wall or the Weeping Wall, and it's like this feeling of God is here.
That God is here, and that the God can't be anywhere else. Like, it's not a real prayer if it's, you know, not here. That's like the message. And that's not something they made up for birthright. That's like Harav Kook, you know, kind of messaging of the seasons are only the seasons here, and this is only, and the sun is the this kind of.
Yeah. And I had this insight that I think for people who need to believe that God is real, so Israel must exist. Like,
wait, I don't understand.
Yeah. God brought us here, you know?
So obviously he exists. That's what you're saying.
He exists. Like there is God because we are here and we are his chosen people. And he brought us from this terrible catastrophe here. And
you're saying this miracle is the proof that God exists.
I feel like even if people would not ever say that, like I don't see my parents really saying that. But
no, they believe it. Yeah.
But I feel like it's like, and God is here and Jerusalem. And look, it's so old and we came from here and now we're back here. This feeling of like, this is our home and this is our chosen home and God gave it to us. And I feel like Jerusalem syndrome is a thing.
Yeah.
Which is this thing that people experience of coming to Jerusalem and they start believing that they're the Messiah.
Yeah, and then they lose it.
And I don't think I really met someone like that, but I think
I've met some people.
Really?
Yeah.
That it's like really serious.
Yeah, people that also told me about past experiences that they've had that were, you know, basically manic.
Yeah.
But in that context, it was very much what you're describing.
But I feel like when you're so convinced or that's the spirituality that, you know, fills you, then it's like a small dose of this feeling like God is here. And I personally have never felt comfortable praying in the Western Wall. I was like, but God is everywhere. God is me. God is all of us. Like, I don't need to be here. I don't wish for the temple to be a thing. I don't want to slaughter animals as spiritual practice. Like, the idea that God is in this place. And I feel that putting God into anything that's like made out of stone is sacrilegious. Like, mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel that you go and you put like a wish into the wall. It's like, that's weird. I don't think that's how spirituality really works.
Previously, you were talking about how you were sneaking out of the army to go study, you know, singing classes so that you could get accepted to the music academy.
Yeah.
And then it happened.
It happened. I was accepted. I wanted to sing and I went straight to the Jerusalem Academy and had like 4 amazing years. I was in a place where I felt like I belonged. It was very leftist and liberal and queer. I was very good at what I did. I was like top of my class. And very quickly I was like, okay, this is the career that I want. And I want it on a very high level. Like I wanted to be famous. And I understood that where there's jobs and money and opportunities is Germany. I set my sights on like, I'm gonna continue my studies in Germany and I'm gonna have an international career.
And during your studies in Jerusalem, you went back to a meeting of Kids for Peace.
I did. There was an alumni meeting of Kids for Peace. There were a few throughout the years. And this was one that I chose to go to. It was held in Jaffa. And I was 22 at the time. So that was like 2015. And it was like this period where there were lots of stabbing occurrences of like Palestinians who would go into like central places in Tel Aviv and attack people with a knife.
In Jerusalem mostly, yeah.
Yeah. But no, I remember there was like something big in Tel Aviv, like near the big army base there. And then I was in Jaffa and I was scared for my life. I remember sitting near the sea and being like, oh, someone could come and stab me any moment now. And then I went to this like dialogue group with Palestinian teenagers mostly. And the person who was with me on the trip to the summer camp when I was a child. He was still working for Kids for Peace, and he was there. He was like the facilitator of the group. And he spoke to us about his journey. And he told us about his parents who are Holocaust survivors. And he said, and I look at the Palestinians and I'm like, I can't ignore what's happening to them, because that would be like ignoring the Holocaust. And that was the first time I had ever heard someone say that what's happening to the Palestinians is like a Holocaust. And
making that equivalent.
Yeah. I was furious. I was really angry. I was like, how can you do that?
How dare you?
How dare you? Like, these people are stabbing us in the streets. Like, they don't want to have peace with us, and we're not Nazis. Are you calling us Nazis? Like, what's going on?
You know, this is really ironic because your grandfather was part of a resistance group.
Yes, he was.
The partisans in the forests.
Yes, he was.
It's like that was resistance. That was armed resistance.
It was.
And we're very proud of it.
And we're very proud of it. We're very proud of also being like part of the Jews who fought back and not just the ones who went like lambs to the slaughter.
Like they said.
Yeah. Even though my grandfather himself didn't participate in any action because he was crippled. But for sure, like there's this huge pride. But I was very non-political.
So you didn't make that connection like I just did?
Not at all. I still had in my head, no, they just hate Jews. They're just violent people.
And they're not the perfect victims, so how could you equate them to victims of a Holocaust?
Yeah. So that was a difficult experience for me, and it didn't leave me wanting to do more. But a year later, another dialogue group was opened, a Kids for Peace for adults. So it wasn't alumni and it wasn't young people. It was adult Jews and adult Palestinians who would meet in the old city. And I remember I had to choose because it fell on like one of my courses in opera school, which was like something I really wanted to participate in. And I was like, opera school, peace work, opera school, peace work. And then I chose the peace work. I was like, okay, I'm going to go do that. And we met in the old city once a week. My sister-in-law, who is more religious than I am and definitely more right-wing, also participated. And a friend of mine from the academy, who later during the talks I understood grew up in a settlement, and her brother was killed in a terror attack. Yet she chose to do peace work. And her story was very, very inspiring. And there was also this guy who, had his sort of awakening during his army service.
So these people came to speak to you guys?
No, they were part of the group.
Oh, okay.
They were mamish part of the group. And then there were Palestinians from refugee camps. And we did need translation. Not all of them spoke Hebrew or English. And again, there was this like me coming face to face with understanding that the Jews in this situation are the bad guys. I really felt it. And just like hearing the people's stories was like, ooh, their lives sound terrible. And we are doing it. And I remember sharing at some point, I was like, I can't accept that. I can't accept that the Zionists are the bad people in this story. I'm sorry. I want to feel your pain. I want us to be in dialogue. I want to trust you. I understand this is a matter of trust, of hearing like the personal stories and seeing the humanity. But I was like, there's no way that we are the bad people in this story. And we met with all sorts of people, activists and religious leaders, like this woman rabbi, well-known rabbi in Jerusalem, who does a lot of also dialogue work and interfaith work, very sweet woman. And this religious settler who was also had this like awakening that the Palestinians around him are human. So he also does work, peace work with them. And then like the whole thing was like leading to this big project that we will do that will somehow allow more peace. And we decided to make little bundles of candy and hand it out to Palestinians leaving Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. as like a Christmas Hanukkah gift. And looking back, I think that was such a weird thing to decide to do, as like to show any support or solidarity. At the time I was like, oh my God, I'm such a cool like peace worker. I don't know. It was like a sweet gesture, I guess, but it was meaningless. Looking back, I don't think we did anything really. But at the time, I felt that what this like giving out of the candy was a very brave act, and that, ooh, look at me, I'm doing activism. Looking back at these experiences of like these dialogue groups, I'm still surprised that it didn't move me deeper to change. Like, why didn't I go immediately to my parents and ask them, why don't I know Arabic? Like, I want to go and learn Arabic. Like, why was I so angry at them for not knowing English or Hebrew? I feel like I really wanted to belong in Israeli society, and doing too much leftist work would have been a mark on my name. It already was. Like, there was this girl at school who was like, are you right wing or left wing? And I said, left wing. And then she gave me the finger. Like, again, totally clueless.
When you were younger, you mean?
Yeah, when I was younger, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like these small meetings with Palestinians was me trying to like say, no, but you're a good person. Like, look, you're doing all of this stuff. And I was just like dipping my toe into it, but not really diving into it. Not really seeing the pain and the struggle of the Palestinian people, not understanding the historical context, not being told the historical context.
I think that's the main issue that I have with these dialogue groups, because I think that you did experience something that shook you.
Yeah.
And it took time until you realized what that meant.
Yeah.
But it was needed to have that initial shaking that you're describing. I think you wouldn't be where you are today without it. But on the other hand, the historical context, I think, is something that's very lacking in these spaces. It's like, okay, we're in a joint space. We're going to do peace work. We're going to do interfaith. We're going to do dialogue. But what about all the history that, but like the Israeli side is lacking to understand what is really going on here? Like, how about teaching us? Like, how about them asking you, oh, you live in an Arab home, so-called Arab home. Do you know who lived there beforehand? Have you asked yourself? Like, these are questions that I think if they were risen at the time, then they could maybe shake you even more. But on the other hand, I realize that you weren't in a place where you were able to even be shaken more than what you were already. Like, there was this red line you weren't going to cross. It's very obvious. Like, you wanted to be part of Israeli society. And so maybe if you were even asked that question, it wouldn't register at that time. Like, you weren't ready to be asking those kinds of questions.
Yeah. It would have been way too threatening to my identity, to my home, to my spirituality, to everything that I believed. And these dialogue groups give us the illusion that these are two sides, equal sides that just need to get to know each other.
Symmetrical.
Yeah. We just need to get to know each other. And that's all that's keeping us from living here peacefully, is that we think that the other person is a monster, which in a way is true, but there's
more to it.
There's way more to it. And I feel like it's really not the responsibility of 11-year-old children to make peace. Kids for peace. Like, it's not our responsibility. It's the grown-ups' responsibility to wake up and to realize what's happening. And the change has to be systematic. And it's so much bigger than individual people learning.
It's about policies.
Yeah.
Yeah. The kids that you were meeting were living under very harsh policies that were being implemented by people who were running the state.
Yeah.
I think, though, all of these parts are important. It's a puzzle. Like, it's important that children not grow up and reach the age of 22 without ever meeting a Palestinian. Sure. That's harmful.
Yeah.
So something needs to be done. The problem is that it's done through these programs of dialogue that totally ignore this whole dark side that they don't want to expose the children to. So it's kind of like there's an unease with it.
Yeah.
I hear this from many people who were participants, whether they're Palestinians that experienced their Israeli counterparts after years of friendship and going to these summer camps together, deciding to serve in the military and being very disappointed, you know, or Israelis that feel like you were describing, like, I'm too shaken. This is threatening my identity. I can't go further than this.
Yeah. And I do remember after having experienced these dialogue groups, knowing that whenever someone said, but the Arabs or the Palestinians, they don't want peace. And I was like, I think a lot of them do.
Because you know it because of the dialogue groups.
Yeah. I think a lot of them would actually be really happy to have peace. I think it did help me not see them as a collective evil, or that not all of them just want to live in war forever. All of them want to kill the Jews, like, because they wouldn't come to the group if they wanted to kill me, you know? And I know that after the group was over, my sister-in-law actually had a tour with the guy from Jericho. Like he snuck her into Jericho, and like, because she was researching for like a book she was writing. So they actually stayed in touch for a while, and we all stayed in touch for a while, and it was nice. But again, then I was actually very much immersed in getting myself out of Israeli society by going to study in Germany, which was not peace work. And it was also not Israeli work. It was like, I did want to go to be international so that I could come back and work in Israel. Like when I left Israel, both me and my partner Dan, who we were both at the time Zionist, we never left Israel like a lot of people leave Israel for Germany. We were like, oh, we're going to come back. And I just wanted to have enough.
You wanted to make it big abroad so you could come back and be big here.
Big here, because also there's like one opera house, and at the time, it's changed a bit since, but at the time, like the lead singers that they bring are always international.
So you wanted to like become that international singer so that it would take you back here.
Yeah.
As, oh, she went and studied and made it abroad.
And I have friends now that are in that position, that they get invited to the Israeli Opera House because they're successful in Europe.
And then you moved to Germany.
Yeah, me and Dan moved to Germany together. And I got into this program in Munich, this master's degree in opera singing. It was the first audition I ever did abroad, and I got in, and it was like a dream come true for me. It was a bit uncomfortable or controversial that I decided to go to Germany. I remember my grandmother from my father's side, Grandma Barbara, saying that she will never step foot in Germany. And she never has, I think, in her life after what they did to her and her husband. I remember also having this like breakdown at some point because my grandfather had suffered a stroke at the end of his life. Like he was suffering from the decapitation of like the stroke for 2 years, and he couldn't speak. He couldn't really communicate. And I knew that I was headed to Germany, and I was like crying. I was like, I can't even get his blessing. Like, I can't even know if that's okay. And we moved to Germany. We both studied German, and I fell in love with the language. I thought it was so beautiful, and it ran really smoothly in my mouth. It was an experience to also be specifically in Munich, which is where the Nazi party started. The music school there is inside a very Nazi building.
What do you mean very Nazi?
It was the first building built for the Nazi party.
Oh my God.
It's like these twin buildings that are these massive, heavy stone marble with like enormous columns. You go in, you're like, okay, this is a very Nazi building. It's like, it's sort of Greek style, but not. And very square, very heavy doors.
Very monumental.
Yeah. And now it's like a school for music.
Wow, that's crazy. So that's where you went to study.
I was in a program that was like in 2 different buildings. So that's also where I spend a lot of my time. And small, like hilarious story. There's this movie on Netflix called Munich, which is about the Munich agreements that happened. And it happened in that building. And they shot the scenes in that building. And I remember coming to school one day and there was an army of Nazis in front of my school.
They were like extras.
They were extras
Oh
dressed
my God.
as Nazi soldiers.
So-
and there was like a Nazi flag. And you walk inside and there's like Nazi flags and Nazi eagles. And
Oh my God.
it was a trip. That was crazy.
Wow. And did they tell you like this is a movie?
No, they told us, they sent us emails. They're like, remember there's a movie, and I totally spaced and it just like got there and it was like, and I sent videos to my family
Oh
and
my God.
they freaked out for a second. And I'm like, no, it's a movie set. Okay. And it was during COVID times and they were all wearing like COVID
The
masks.
masks.
So it was this like dystopian Nazi future that has COVID.
Wow.
And the experience of learning German culture and German poetry and
German opera.
listening to Wagner and Strauss, which is, you don't play Wagner in Israel. It's like
Yeah.
highly, highly frowned upon.
Because he was a Nazi.
Because he was anti-Semitic.
Hmm.
He was way before Nazis. But like his texts about anti-Semitic thoughts was like used by Nazi propaganda. And I know that Hitler's favorite opera was Wagner.
Yeah.
But ironically, I've learned lately Herzl would listen to
Yeah.
Wagner operas
I've heard
while
that.
he wrote his book as well. So
Basically created the Zionist
the Zionist
ideology.
So
How ironic.
yeah, it's all in the eye of the beholder. And meeting German people and really connecting to them. And then moments where I saw the difference. I saw, what people say that like Israelis are so hot and warm and like fun and helpful people, and Germans are like a little colder, a little more private. I did feel that. Like there were moments where we felt like very lonely. I struggled very much in the beginning to keep my religious ways because my entire life almost I kept the Jewish laws of like not
Observing Shabbat.
not working, not turning on lights, not cooking, eating
On Saturday.
yeah, not all the time.
Not all
on
the time.
Saturday, Friday night,
Yeah.
of going to the synagogue, of purification after menstruation, of food, keeping kosher, and it became very difficult and frankly impossible because I was not in a Jewish place anymore, and I had to work and perform on Friday nights and on Saturdays.
That's tough.
It was very stressful, and very quickly the stress got to me. Also because my program was all in German and my German was still very new, and the move to a new city, to a new apartment, Dan and I had also gotten engaged very like adjacent to the move. And I quickly got injured. I suffered a herniated disc on my lower back and just like tried to push through until eventually I had to be hospitalized and operated on. That was not a fun time. Eventually, like the injury got so bad that I had to get operated on again. And then I took a break from my studies and moved back to Israel to heal and rehabilitate my body and basically like walk again, get strong mentally and physically, and then try again, basically. And at the end of 3 months, Dan and I got married. And for me, it was like a miracle that I could dance at my own wedding. And my mother did the ceremony, and it was a very spiritual ceremony, very musical. And then we came back to Germany after the wedding, and for me to like complete my degree, to start my career, to make it. And then COVID hit, and for a minute there, it seemed like my career might be over. Like everything that I had going got canceled. All these opportunities that started popping up were just disappeared. And Dan and I sort of went into this like spiral of madness because it felt like the world was ending, and we took a lot of drugs,
like psychedelics.
Also psychedelics, a lot of marijuana, and we spent a lot of time outdoors in nature. It was an interesting time of like self-exploration for me, and then a hope that my career won't be finished. And this was an interesting time for Dan, my partner, because one day we went out, we said, let's go to the river. There's a beautiful river in Munich. So let's go out. And like Munich in the spring and summer is gorgeous. And we went out, and there was this bench near our home that always had like stuff that people were giving away for free and books. And there was this like pile of books that looked like some kind of old revolutionary had died and someone threw out all of his books. And it was all these books that were like red and were about like Marxism. And Dan was like a philosophy student at the time, or very, very lost in sort of what is the world? What am I doing here? And then he found these books. He's like, okay, interesting. And he's a reader. Like he reads for a living, basically. And he took the books. He started reading a book called Faschismustheorien, Theories of Fascism, in German.
He read it in German.
Yes, his German is very, very, very good when it comes to academic texts. And I think the only way he would have met this text was that if he had come to Germany and had learned the German language, because this book does not exist in Hebrew or in Israel.
Wow.
And it convinced him so much. It showed him a materialistic Marxist explanation of what happened in the Second World War and the Nazi regime. It convinced him so much that it just changed his life completely.
Radicalized him.
It radicalized him. And he stopped smoking weed because he felt like, oh my God, if this is true, then everything I know is wrong.
So I better be sharp.
I better be sharp.
Notice everything.
I have to learn everything. I have to re-educate myself. And he just started reading and listening to Noam Chomsky, which I had no idea who it was. I was like, done. Okay, it's a phase. He'll get out of it. He'll just read another book and it'll be okay. And I think the first understanding that he had and then he passed on to me was a different way of understanding America. Because we were both big fans of the USA. Like, I loved everything to do with the USA. I loved Americans, and I loved American movies, and Dan really loved American stand-up and the UFC, which is like mixed martial arts, and American history. Like, we both thought this was like great. And he thought that capitalism was good because it's growth. It means there's more of everything. There's more
goodness to share.
Yeah, more abundance. And then suddenly he's like, oh my God, no, this is an empire, and they took over the world. And he educated himself, and then he educated me. And I was in a place of kind of deep depression because I had gone to a competition and I lost. And I was like, what's going to be with my career? COVID's not ending. And suddenly we were like in this bubble of like
radicalization.
Yeah. And we started watching movies and documentaries, and he was really in it. I wasn't quite there. And then I got a job offer to like sing in an opera house, which is like, it never happens that you just get a job offer, but they desperately needed a soprano and someone recommended me. And we moved all the way to the northern Germany to this tiny town called Flensburg. And I started working in an opera house, and that was like, oh my God, God must love me. Like, I had nothing. I was like, I have nothing. Nobody knows me here. I don't have an agent. I don't know how to audition. Everything's fucked. And suddenly, like, I had work, and we desperately needed money. And I was like, we're doing this. And joining the opera house was at first like so much fun. And then May 2021 happened. And Dan was like, oh crap, I'm going to have to look at Israel now. I'm going to have to take this understanding of the world, this radical understanding of the world, and put it on Israel.
Because shit was hitting the fan.
Because shit was hitting the fan.
It was on the news and you had to relate. Like you had to encounter. Because
he knew he will have to do it sooner or later, but was really not wanting to because he knew where this might lead him. And then we had to. And this was the first time that I watched Al Jazeera, that I attempted to try and understand, wait, what is actually happening? Because the Israeli news says one thing. My brother, who's a Zionist, says another thing. Leftist YouTube channels say a third thing. I was like, what actually happened? Was it crazy, IDF soldiers that just violently ran into a mosque and started shooting people? Was it because Palestinians started something? Like, what's going on? And Dan showed me, he's like, yeah, there's a lot of misinformation. It's really hard to know what's actually happening. And that's when we subscribe to Haaretz, which usually do good journalism, even though it's still too liberal for our taste.
But they're basically the only mainstream media channel in Israel that actually reports on what's happening in Gaza other than just numbers and destroyed buildings.
And they have amazing journalists, very brave journalists that are actually defying Israel.
But there's a paywall, so most Israelis aren't exposed. That's the truth.
So we paid so that we could understand what was going on. And it was so hard to be far away when it happened. I remember finishing one of my shows and sitting with the news and seeing like the uprisings in the mixed cities. There was like lots of just angry Palestinians on the streets. And I was like, oh, these angry men, it's their fault. They're ruining the world. And I remember crying, and like sweet German makeup artist was like, what's wrong? And I'm trying to explain to her, and I'm like, it's so complicated. And she had no idea. She couldn't even fathom a reality where there's borders that you can't cross. Because, in Europe, you can just cross from border to border and it's great. But that was really a time where I saw the power of Israel on Gaza, and not the terror that Gaza causes Israel. I saw the terrible power imbalance. Now, I wouldn't say that we would call ourselves anti-Zionists at the time, but we were very critical of Israel. And that summer was the first time that we went to visit Israel after 2 years of COVID, because we decided not to try and visit our family during the pandemic in fear that we might get stuck and not be able to come back. And then finally we got our shots and we got everything that we needed to do, and we went to Israel. And I recommend it. I recommend, if anybody wants to be disillusioned, to
spend 2 years
abroad. 2 years somewhere else and then try coming back in the summer. Where everyone is insane. And like the first...
And everybody's angry.
Everyone's angry. The first difficulty was that we landed on a Saturday and we had no way of getting to Jerusalem. And this was already at the time that I wasn't religious anymore. So I was really angry. I finally had empathy and sympathy for all the non-religious people who...
Or non-Jew.
Or non-Jews,
people.
Who want to be able to travel on all days of the week. And as a religious person living in Israel, in Jerusalem, I was like, but Shabbat, it's so wonderful.
So peaceful.
It's so peaceful. There's no
cars
buses
on the road.
I'm like, you fun-loving non-religious people, just stay home with your families. Why do you have to go to the beach? And suddenly I was like, no, this is frustrating. And we had to pay a lot of money for a taxi. And we felt electricity in the air. We just felt, whoa, people here are ready to explode at each other.
And not necessarily Israelis at Palestinians
Not
either.
At all.
Just everybody at everybody.
Everybody at everybody. I was like, it's too hot here and we're too European. I really felt that like I am not indigenous to this land. My hair hates it. My skin hates it. I feel angry. I feel uncomfortable. You need air conditioning to feel like a normal person instead of having houses and facilities in an architecture that actually works with the climate.
Which like, there was here.
There was, like my parents' home, you know?
Exactly, in the Palestinian homes.
But most buildings built after occupation are like just totally unsuitable for this weather. And I just felt we're a bunch of Ashkenazi white people living in the desert. And it's uncomfortable. And on this trip, it was the first time in my life that I noticed that the people who give service, the people at the drugstore or the cleaners in the street or the bus drivers, they're all Palestinians, especially in Jerusalem. Like I really felt the apartheid. I felt like they are the ones serving the white people and they're not the ones enjoying the facilities. They're the ones giving it to us. It's just the first time I noticed it. And Dan and I were in this position where we were like, we're going to come critical of Zionism and we're going to talk about it with people. And it wasn't just Zionism, it was like capitalism. It was like the whole thing that we grew up on. And we wanted to talk to people. We wanted to open their eyes as well. We wanted them to see and understand us and give us empathy and I don't know what. Join the revolution. Like, I don't know what we were expecting. We got mostly blank stares and people thought we were like weird or they're like, communism didn't work. What are you talking about? I remember my older brother telling me like that he's very worried about what we might be thinking about Israel if we're leftist now. I just remember us sort of leaving feeling quite scared and disappointed that the community that we left and like the certainty that we were going to come back and live in Jerusalem or in Israel or whatever was like everyone was so different from us suddenly and nobody really understood our politics.
But then you went back to Germany and you couldn't find your community there either.
No, not in the opera world anyway. We came back and I started noticing the problems in the opera house and in the way the bosses were treating us and sort of understanding from, again, like a radical perspective that I'm a worker in a factory. I'm not a diva. Like I'm not...
You thought you were going to be a diva, but
I really thought I was. Everyone told me like, oh, you know, this job pays shit. And I was like, okay, but that's a sacrifice that I'm going to make for the music or whatever.
To be the star.
To be the star. And suddenly I'm like, I'm the star. I am working the most out of everyone here. I'm singing the hardest pieces. I'm being paid the least. I was paid less than my male counterpart who had exactly the same degrees as me and exactly the same experience. Like I sang the Queen of the Night, which is considered like one of the hardest roles to sing in opera. And if I was a guest singer and not part of the ensemble, I would get paid a lot for every show. But they would have rather have someone from the ensemble
like in-house,
in-house and pay her just regularly. And I understood suddenly like, oh, we're not really unified. Like there's no solidarity between us as soloists because there's too few jobs and too many singers and we're all replaceable. And so we're never going to actually stand up for each other. And I understood that the boss who gave me this job and was very fond of me, I actually did like, she gave me this whole show, this whole recital just for myself of Jewish music that I did.
Oh, wow.
Which was like a beautiful experience for me. But then I saw that she was really mistreating us as people. And I volunteered to be the spokesperson, one of the spokespersons of the ensemble. And we came to her for like a formal meeting to sort of be the coordinators, to tell her like the demands of the ensemble and to hear what she has to say. And after that meeting, she called me in and she told me to sit down and she starts reading from a page, and in this like really beautiful German, she starts reading a story that she wrote, this fairy tale of a young girl who had no experience and had never sung in anything. And then this older woman who gave her so many beautiful opportunities.
Oh my God.
And then this young girl defied this older woman. And oh, wow, I hope this story has a good ending. And I was just sitting there.
That is like crazy.
I was mortified. I didn't know what to do.
That's so, it's like, wow.
It was crazy. And it was written so beautifully too. It was like, I can't believe she sat and wrote that.
That's like kind of sick.
It was kind of sick. And I wish I had more courage or more fire to tell her that's kind of sick.
And also, like, we're workers and we have demands. So you can keep your fairy tales somewhere else because we're here to talk work.
But
wow.
That's not really the way I communicate with people, especially not people who have power over me.
Yeah.
So I told her that I'm very, very sorry. I didn't mean it that way. And of course I respect her and I respect the way she works, and like got out of there. And then immediately I told the ensemble like what happened and told them that I don't want to be the spokesperson anymore and I want to protect myself because I don't want to lose my job. And things got just steadily really, really bad. There was one singer that the director didn't like at all and forced her to go on stage for a rehearsal, even though she had like an eye infection and was like in terrible, terrible pain. It just like all these moments of abuse.
Where you realize that just because she's a woman doesn't mean that she's going to manage you guys in a feminist manner.
Totally. I was really disappointed. I thought it would be great to work with a woman. And then just seeing that she's just a CEO, you know, she's just a person in power. It doesn't matter what her gender is. And I'm sure that to get to where she was as like a female director with, you know, with a name for herself, she had to like elbow herself, her way through. She had to fight all the men who told her that she's not able to.
But what did she do with her power once she had it?
Yeah, abused it, abused us.
So that's where you learned what white feminism is?
That's where I really felt it. Yeah. It's where I really, really felt it. I don't know if I called it white feminism at the time, but that's where I was like, that's not okay. Like, that's not what women should be striving for. That's not okay. Yeah. And then a difficult thing happened, which was that I got pregnant when it wasn't planned and not wanted. And we decided that I should have an abortion. And I discovered through this podcast that there is such a thing as an abortion doula, which I did not know was a thing. And I didn't speak about it before, but when I was 17, I also had gotten pregnant and had an abortion in Israel and didn't have that support at all. And suddenly I was like, whoa, I need this support now. And it was the first time that I felt like, oh, I could be that. Like if I'm not an opera singer, like I want to be that. I want to give people support through their abortions.
You're like, that's the kind of feminist I want to be.
Yeah, totally. And I found this abortion doula, and like a day before my scheduled abortion, there was this like group meeting on Zoom. It was just like wonderful words and just really well held. It was beautiful. And she later supported me after the abortion was over. And to me, this moment was a spiritual moment. Because at the time, through the radicalization and through the disillusionment from Zionism and the belief in the Israeli story, I started losing God. I started losing religion. I also didn't have a community that I could really pray with. My partner was also like totally in his radical thoughts, and there wasn't a place for spirituality. And there was a moment when we were in Flensburg. It was Yom Kippur, which is, you know, the holiest day of the Jewish tradition. And I sat with Dan and I was like, I don't think that there's a God. And then our mezuzah, which is like a scroll that Jews put on the doors to protect the house, fell. Just like boom.
Wow. That would be a better story if she wrote that, you know? That's like the kind of stuff you see in movies.
It was kind of freaky. And then another time where I spoke with another friend and I was like, I'm afraid to believe that there isn't a God. And then the Bible that we had like fell. And yeah, I was like, what is my spirituality? What am I praying to? If this Jewish God doesn't exist, if the Judaism in Israel and Zionism is a lie or something, a lie that I've been told, or the spirituality that is in a way kind of empty, if it's built on this violence and this occupation, like what are we keeping, like why is this worth keeping alive if it's causing destruction? And I also felt really betrayed because I felt like my spirituality and my innocence and my sensitive heart was manipulated to be a soldier and to believe that I'm doing it for God. I think that's really where it all came to. Like, I'm doing this for my country, for my people, for my God. And like, if none of that is real and worth saving, because saving it or protecting it means causing so much suffering for other people, then none of this is real. All I've learned, all I was built up on to like love so much, to keep alive, was just meaningless or even bad, you know, something I should shun, something I should really not believe in. And I was left with this really big emptiness. And the abortion that came slowly pushed me to the decision to leave the opera world.
Because it was like connected to how this woman was treating you, together with how reproductive rights are not respected in many places. I remember you telling me about like how this is all connected. Like,
yeah, it all felt very connected. There was really a few months or weeks after my abortion, I sat in the changing room for a show and reading on my phone that Roe v. Wade was overturned. For the first time, like reading politics and like trying to understand it, and
like current politics,
you know, that's beyond just, oh, Trump is president and that's bad, you know, understanding that I had the privilege of getting an abortion and there's people in the world who can't, like in the United States, who will not be able to legally have an abortion if this is something that they want or they need. And that was the first time in my life that like a little fire was lit inside of my body and in my heart. And I felt rage. And I was like, I have to do something. What can I do? I was like, what am I doing here? Why am I going to go play dress up and like sing these really stupid, bad operas? This isn't art. This isn't prayer. This isn't God's work. Like, it became very clear to me.
It's showbiz.
It was showbiz. It was entertainment for rich people. I really felt at moments, you know, especially when I had to continue to perform while still experiencing my abortion, and the crowd has no idea. Like, I'm not happy to be there. I do not want to sing for them right now, but it's my job. That's when it felt like a bit like prostitution. Like, suddenly I understood I'm selling my body for something here. And this is not what I came here to do. And it was a heartbreaking decision, but I left. I said, I'm leaving this theater. I'm leaving the entire career. Even though I had an agent who really wanted me to go further, I tried auditioning to other places and sang just really badly. Like, I couldn't push through. My body needed rest. My body said, no, you're not doing this anymore. And you know, all the pain that I was experiencing, all the herniated discs and the reflux, like just stomach problems, not being able to digest food properly, terrible problems with my voice, throat pain, trouble sleeping, anxiety, this like need to be perfect all the time. My body was just like signaling nonstop, this is not your way. You have to change your life. And I felt like this abortion was my body and I don't know, the divine feminine or the spirit or you know, my future child telling me, hey, you need a change. And the change came with a fire, with like, I need to change. And you know what? Society needs to change too. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do what I can to make it change. And at first, Dan and I decided to leave Germany and try and live outside of capitalism for a bit, to take the money that we saved, to sell all of our belongings, to walk barefoot, to
be professional hippies,
to just like rely on people's good-heartedness, that they will like give us what we need. And we were like deep into like nonviolent communication at the time. So we were all like, oh, we'll just tell people what our needs are and people will be like sweet and just, you know, fulfill our needs, because that's what human beings are here for, actually.
I'll put a link for what nonviolent communication is in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah, still recommended, even though we're laughing about it
a bit. And we started traveling with just 2 backpacks on our backs. We decided to go to what's called a rainbow gathering, which is a gathering of hippies in the middle of nature for an entire month. So we hitchhiked all the way to Bulgaria and we went to the rainbow, hoping to find community, hoping to find like the community that we're looking for, the connection to nature, the, you know, saying, okay, we're going to learn how to do things with our hands for once. We're going to like cook food for a bunch of people and we're going to build things and we're going to be like, not just, you know, academics and opera singers. We're actually going to like, let's be human. And then very quickly, Dan was first quite disillusioned from the rainbow. He saw it as rich people playing dress up as hippies. He's like, oh, these people can afford to be here in nature and live this sort of like alternative life
for a month.
And then they go back to their high-tech jobs where, you know, they can actually afford to do this. And that actual, you know, lower class people can't actually
go out to nature,
go out to nature and just live with community. And they're not welcome either. Like we actually met like a homeless person and befriended him. And he was also just traveling, just like moving from hostel to hostel, volunteering, but had little to no money. And we were like, hey, so come to the rainbow with us. And he's like, oh, they don't like me at rainbows. They don't accept me there. They think I'm weird. And I think it's because he's poor, you know? And we met some Israelis as well. And we were like,
yeah,
sort of
say no more,
disappointed to hear that they're all, you know, they used to be soldiers and they still love Israel, and you know, they're just here to clear their minds after their service and, you know, go back to being good civilians of Israel. We thought that people would be radical at the rainbow, and they weren't.
And this kind of change that you were hoping for, and like this radical revolution that you were wanting to like explore, ended up being kind of disappointing as well.
Yeah. And then Dan said, I want to go back to Israel. I want to learn history. I want to go back to school, and I want us to prepare, you know, for our future family, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And we agreed that if we go back to Israel, then we're going to be active in Israel. Like we're going to understand the conflict better, and we're going to find the groups that are trying to change it. Because we can't just go back to living like none of this exists. We came back and I did a course online of being an abortion doula that my own abortion doula taught me. And then I also discovered another course of training to become a full spectrum doula.
Which is what I explained in the beginning.
Yeah.
About all the stages. It's not only birth or abortion, but many other cycles in life.
And that's where like I really felt the calling of support work, of healing work, and to start over, to leave the performative world behind me. At the time, I wasn't even sure if I was going to ever sing again. And I decided to venture into this path. And at the same time, to learn what it is to be like an activist, and to join the groups who are looking at the occupation, who are doing what they need to do or what they believe they should do to create change.
And two other things that I want to mention that are connected to all of the things that you're talking about is we actually filmed a musical session where you sang and played the guitar, and Elik, another friend who's a musician, played the viola and sang. And that's going to be kind of like a bonus episode. So I really recommend everybody go watch it. It's filmed. It's beautiful. I'm super excited about it.
It was an amazing experience.
And you got to use your voice and sing and make music. But this time it was for this purpose that you have. This time it served the message that you want to bring to the world. And you were using your voice, you know, metaphorically and physically.
Yes.
And I thought it was just really special.
It was a new experience for me. Like a lot has changed for me since October of 2023.
Which brings me to the second thing that I want to mention is that now you're pregnant.
Yes.
And now it is a wanted pregnancy.
It's now a wanted pregnancy.
So this kind of like all connects, because learning to use your voice in the way that serves activism and prayer, and learning how to lead prayer circles that are not Zionist, but that are spiritual and Jewish on the other hand, and also being pregnant after studying to be a full spectrum doula, and all of this together, I feel like a lot of the things that you talked about kind of like brought you to this point of the intersection between like using your voice and bringing life to the world.
Absolutely. And the very empowering experience that I've been experiencing of not just, you know, using my voice in song, but using my voice, like having a voice, having opinions. Like I feel like a big thread that runs through this entire story is me being kind of clueless, me being very influenced by other people, you know, being rebellious just so I wouldn't be thought of as too sensitive, but not actually having an opinion about anything. And now I do. Like I have an opinion. Like if you want to talk to me about abortion, I can talk about abortion. If you want to talk to me about Zionism, I have an opinion. I'm not the most intellectual. I can't give you all the details. I'm really blessed to have Dan who knows so much more.
He's like your source for
oh my God.
all the knowledge.
Everyone needs to listen to Dan, really. But I feel like my intuition, my heart, my womb, and my fire are like allowing me to be heard for the first time in my life, to be seen as a person and not just as a voice. Beautiful voice, you know, but like as a person who has something to say and has to give something to the world. I'm still figuring out exactly what it is that I want to give and to whom. I feel like all the parts of me are asking for a lot right now. Like the Jewish part still wants a part of me. The just regular artistic part wants a part of me, and the activist radical part wants a part of me. So I'm trying to feel like the abundance that I have to give can't run dry. And I hope to truly create a good, better reality for my child. A reality where they don't have to live in a lie. Like we're going to be really honest with them as much as we can.
I'm sure Dan will be like teaching them everything from the moment they can speak.
Yeah. And I want to teach them that it's okay to be sensitive. That you're allowed to be sensitive, and it's okay that the world is really hard for you, and it's okay to be brave anyway.
It's interesting because your mother was trying to protect you and be like, well, you're too sensitive. Maybe you shouldn't go to Poland, or maybe you shouldn't go to the army. But you're going to be like, maybe you shouldn't go, both because it's okay to be sensitive and you don't have to fight that and you don't have to like resist that and prove to everybody that you're not. But also there's other aspects that you should know. Let's sit down and talk about it. So I feel
Exactly.
like that's kind of interesting as well. There's also something that really touched me when I heard you sing this song about women in Gaza currently that you see on the other side of the wall, quote unquote, but also very materialistically, that can't have what you're having right now. If they're going through pregnancy or birth or an abortion or even just menstruating, they don't have the basic things that they need. And it was really touching to hear like how you relate to that as someone who's going through pregnancy right now.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the big thing that I learned from my abortion doula practice, which is based on Black feminist wisdom, that none of us are free until all of us are free. That women, white women, are not emancipated if Palestinian women are dying and suffering. And it's still wacky to me that like I get to, eat super healthy food, and I'm going to hopefully, have a great midwife and a home birth, and I'm going to get like my dream, whatever. And that they can't. That's just like, I don't know what to do with that feeling most of the time. And I pray that I'll find a way to get to them, to like give them the support that they need. Jump over the wall. I don't know. Create some kind of NGO.
But I think even singing a song about this is something that it's strong in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like making that present, that idea that you just talked about, like as an Israeli Jewish woman who's pregnant right now, I cannot accept that there are women in Gaza or anywhere, Palestinians or anywhere, that are not able to give birth in like the way that they should be able to. Like
that they should or that they want. That they have no authority over their own bodies. They have no freedom over their own bodies. And I hope to continue spreading that knowledge, spreading the song is the least I can do. And it's a prayer, actually, It's something that I prayed in real time, and I pray with myself, and I like remind myself, and I see them. I see their suffering, and it's just the very least that I can do. And if it might be the only thing that I can do, because I don't know how much of like an active activist I can be, especially now if I'm going to have a baby. I just hope, I don't know, my dream, my wish is that this song reaches them, that they know that I see them, and I wish I could do more.
They know that you weren't indifferent while this was all happening.
I wasn't indifferent, and I wasn't part of the people killing them.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't. I refused to be.
Yeah. For those of you who are wondering what song we're talking about, there's this musical session that we filmed, and it's going to be published right after this episode, basically. So check it out. And in addition, me and Ayelet are going to post a bonus episode that goes a little deeper into the things that we just talked about and more experiences that we didn't mention during this episode. And this is going to be on the Patreon page. So I recommend going and checking that out. It's in the show notes. If you want to keep hearing these stories and support the podcast, that would be amazing. I really appreciate all of you who have already began supporting the podcast. It really helps me go on and keep doing this. And it's kind of like the fuel and really helps it happen. So thank you so much. And thank you, Ayelet.
Thank you, Yav.
I really loved hearing your story. I mean, you have such a way of like explaining all of these different emotions and experiences in like such a descriptive way. I know that people are going to get a lot of insight from what you just told. And hopefully they'll want to also check out the bonus episode.
Yeah.
Hopefully hear you sing with your beautiful, beautiful voice and beautiful songs and prayers. So all of this that I just mentioned is all going to be in the show notes. And thank you everyone for listening.